to do the go-to thing? Okay, not sure. Wait. Okay. So yeah, sorry. So it's so this is Jina, and it really creates a very beautiful array of jingles, And but the very fun part here is the foundation of this Junjuna is made up of fired bullet, and it's being converted in Afghanistan by the locals, and the bullet itself is G55 and G50, and normally is produced in America and used by the NATO forces to the Afghan civilians, or maybe fundamentalists. I have no idea, but it's again a very vague thing. But it's a very beautiful as well, because you are making very beautiful sound like this. But it's all like fired bullet. So I was using this bullet throughout my performances to, again, play the idea of what is political, what is non-political, what is beautiful, what is not beautiful, what is art even, what is not art, what is singing, what is not singing. So yeah. So I think that's it. So yeah, I mean, through my installation, I was just trying to raise a lot of questions around sympathy, empathy, care, and yeah, and because you may feel and say that I'm alive. I was trying to mimic my death, and that's all fake. It's again one of the very beautiful things that I've been exploring, and it's the idea of fake news. Because throughout the history we see that how mainstream media have been used by the world power to propagate, to spread their agenda to the masses. So again, I mean, I was alive, but I was mimicking, I was faking. But there are so many people, I mean, who are not alive, because we are losing a lot of lives every single moment. So yeah, so that's it. I just hit my 10 minutes beautifully. Yeah, I think, yeah, I did it. So yeah, I think we can definitely talk about it, and I would love to listen to your comments and your analysis and your feedback whatsoever it is, but would be more than happy to receive those. And yeah, and now I would love to uh, leave the stage for Tony and Jonshu if she's around.
Yeah, I'm alive.
Good.
Yeah. Hi, this is my turn. I'm now on a trip in Copenhagen, so I'm not sure the signal is well. I would like to share my screen first. Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Junshu, and my practice is mainly about escapism. And here are 3 boxes. I often show it to my tutor, personal tutor. This is these 3 boxes quite related to my my theme. Start from my anxiety, and then my practice, my methodology more related to planner, and then step into some space, some nowhere. And I borrowed some theory from Gilles Deleuze, and the starting point, the vanishing point, the fold, and the whole concept related to the line of escape. And to respond our topic, the choreography, and I would like to show the starting point of my inspiration. It's called NDT, Little Land Dance Theater, and they are a contemporary dance company from Netherlands, and their modern dance make me rethink about the movement, the daily route, the daily, more like a daily ritual, and something inspired me how to develop my concept. Maybe there is a fault, there's an anxiety, like some vanishing point, and then you try to start move and step into somewhere. And then I was very, the starting point I'm interested in NDT is they did a video in the during the pandemic, because when they can't make some performance in the theater, so they make their own practice at their flights, and they make that video called Quarantine Practitioner. And I would like to show you the video at last. And this video also reminds me, let me rethink about, the daily routine, daily practice, because I'm not the kind of person who have work in progress. I make my plan and keep thinking and make every detail, make every decision before I make my work. So, but I rewatch this video and thinking about my practice. Maybe I could see my daily route planner in the city as a practice every day. So I would like to show you some work when I did it in the degree show. This is my anxiety, the big balloon, the as tall, the same tall as I am, and I try to live with it in my flight. And here are something related to my planner stuff. Here are some reference about from Virginia Woolf to some traditional paintings. And then here I use Nike Run Club app to document my daily route every day. And here are something more like the also related to Gilles Deleuze, the rhythm theory, and also here are some practice. I think maybe it could be called work in progress because it's not the final work, but I would love to document my daily ritual every day and try to figure out how I will make a decent work at sometimes. Yeah. Now I would like to show you the video about NDT. Yeah, there it is. Could you see it? This is my inspiration. Okay, I will stop here. Yeah, that's it. This is their daily practice. And for me, it's a key inspiration. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll share my screen now. Yeah, so I hope you can see. Just give me a second, please. Yeah, all right. So I'm going to be showing some visuals from my latest body of work, which I showed at for the degree show at Truman. So the starting point for my work was actually like some images that I found from the archives from the 19th century at the British Library in their print room. So I came across these like photographs in print which were taken in 1894 during a time of colonization of India. I mean, at that time, it was like the large Indian subcontinent with, you know, a lot of the present day countries. So I came across these like photographs which were sort of documenting the native bodies, the idea of the, like the native, like what does a native body look like? And the idea behind these photographs were or these prints were actually to measure the body, to study them. And the books that I referred, there's a lot of series of them and a lot of different photographs of different age groups, different demographics in general, study of men, study of women, study of children. And I find it really interesting, the sort of poses that they were made to adopt and the way they were made to like stand, for instance, in front of the camera. So I was really, and it's also interesting that when you look at these images, the postures are the same, the way they are being measured is the same. And I found that sort of very interesting in terms of like this idea of like this adoption of poses in a very like sort of like normalizing way. And that's what I want to like explore within my work, and when I was thinking of I was also fascinated in the background of these of these photographs, and the backdrop is this grid, which is called the Lamprey's grid, and it's 2 by 2 inches in dimensions, each of the squares, and they were there to like measure the body. So in the actual document, there's like a very extensive documentation of like the measurement and sizes of like different parts of the body. It's very extensive. So it's like a proper study on them. And I found the backdrop of the grid, which is like same in this whole study, like very interesting how one sort of pattern is sort of capturing a lot of variations in terms of physicality, age, or things which are different from which the body might not. And what I'm trying to say is, in so many ways, the native bodies were just reduced to the bodies, and I found that really interesting. And that's actually what I was like exploring in my work. So what I did is Yeah, so this is actually like an image of the way I reinterpreted the images. I was using my own body, uh, and the idea behind this was to adopt postures of release over control. Because in the archival images that I came across, the way they were made to stand, they were in poses that suggest hostility, captivity, being controlled. It's very evident in the way they are standing and in the way they are made to stand. Um, but I wanted to sort of like reinterpret or reimagine those bodies using my own uh, as a performance of care. And and one of the interesting things which I found in this work is the way I'm sort of interacting with the grid. For instance, in the um, images, the bodies are made to stand in front of it, and I was interpreting it by like lying on it and sort of taking comfort in it and resting my body on it. And I wonder what that would suggest about the body. And that is something that I'm still thinking about, that I'm still figuring out. And I was also like questioning the use of my own body within this work. Uh, and I think the interest of using my own body is not only like to add on to the idea that yes, my body, even though uh, I don't live in a time of the colonization, I think it still holds on to certain legacies or conditionings or sort of some remnants from those times in the way I think, the way I understand my body. So so the use of my own body is not only to like explore that, but also to question why I still hold on to these uh, conditions still, and do I know of a way of carrying on or existing without those, and what would that look like? So I think these are the things that I'm still trying to understand, that I'm still like questioning with my work. Um, and I'll show you a couple of other images as well. In the same document, they also have like images of the people when they were not studied in front of the backdrop. So these are the images sort of that were taken to sort of observe them in their daily activities. So I'm really interested in that sort of contrast um, in the poses that these bodies are adopting. These poses, they suggest rest, or they suggest carrying about like daily activities, and then in front of the camera they are sort of adopting these like really uh, contrasting forces that suggest different opposite ideas. And 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 in this project I was also thinking in terms of like the camera. um so when I was taking this picture, I was obviously in front of the camera, and I was thinking of the role of the photographer who was taking my pictures. And I was really interested in this idea of like the gaze of the camera. And what I mean by that is photography as I was thinking of photography as a sort of, or I was thinking of the camera as an apparatus that facilitates the gaze. And 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 what I mean by the gaze is not necessarily that particular photographer's gaze, but then the camera is like this all-seeing eye, you know, and it directs its focus on objects, on things, on situations. So I was really interested in that, in the way that bodies adopt or uh, present themselves in front of the camera to various degrees. So I was really interested in the gaze of the camera. And what happened in this, like, in this process of like taking pictures of my work was I didn't really like plan a lot of things. I because I didn't want, I still wanted my body to look natural, I didn't want to like compose it too much. And then what happened was my eyes were like closing because I was trying to really rest my body, rejuvenate my body in this grid. Um, and I found that interesting. Something, the idea that something is looking at me, but then I am not aware of it. Something which which I'm comparing it to the images where the bodies are gazing directly at the camera. So what does that suggest about when I'm thinking of the choreography with relation to the adoption of bodies in front of the camera and the gaze? I'm thinking of yeah, what does that suggest about ideas of uh, privacy and also revealing and disclosing? And I'm really interested in that sort of uh, uh, that liminal space between these sort of ideas and these sort of spheres, and how do we differentiate them, or is there a differentiation, or is it something very subjective, um, or based on just our affects, um, and during this process, like maybe some of you are aware of this, but I, sorry, uh, I was thinking of, like, I mean, I came across Foucault's idea of the panopticon. Maybe some of you already know this, but he talks about the panopticon as a sort of building, and I think he talks of it as a prison system where there there's a there's a there's a there's a cell in the center of the big structure, the big building, and the cell is constructed in such a way that it's open, not in the sense that people can, like, whoever's inside can leave, but it is still a confined space, but you can see through the walls, or maybe there are no walls. And so that whoever is inside the cell, when they look out, I mean, they might not be able to see the people looking at them, but there is this awareness that there is someone watching, or they are being watched all the time. And in that process, in that consciousness, they adopt their bodies to act certain ways, or maybe it's in compliance with what is considered a body should act like, So I was really interested in this sort of like invisible threads of control and power that exists between the gaze, the adoption of poses, or of bodies, and also the idea of care or resting. And I wonder if through this work, am I actually asking if care can be a mediation, can be used as a mediation, or like a modality to question the subjective experience of racialized bodies? I'm not sure. And I think that's something which I'm still trying to understand. But I'm really interested in this idea of how care can be used to question or confront, or maybe if I'm using a grand word, subvert, control, or even just maybe to imagine how bodies might exist outside this invisible sphere of of control. So I'm really, so I think my interest in this like choreographic practice comes from the adoption of bodies with relation to the idea of the gaze, whether that's through the panopticon or through the use of camera. Not necessarily just in a photography studio, but the use of camera as an apparatus in in daily life, I guess. So I think that's it from me. So I'll stop my screen and we'll have Prisha.
Hey, I'll just stop my screen share. Hi, is my screen visible? Okay, so really good to see everyone and hear about the practices of Mushaba, Junshu, and Tony. And yeah, and I'd really like to thank Tony for inviting me to speak today as well. So a bit about me. I'm from India, and I've recently completed my master's in photography from the RCA, and my practice embodies the spirit of a wanderer, unearthing hidden marvels that reside within the ordinary fabric of life. As a story collector, I look into the unifying aspects of environments and bodies, weaving together a narrative that advocates for healing. My methodology is predominantly focusing on mobilizing the photograph as a mode to reflect. The focal point of my reflections today is the project titled Lines of Flight, which was also a part of my degree show. One of the destinations that this project has found itself in is this book, and its essence revolves around the exploration of a narrative that can hold all our narratives together. At its core, it seeks to understand the essence of our nature and the common thread that binds us all together, encouraging a departure from individualistic thinking and embracing the interconnectedness of the flow of our experiences that shape our identities. It explores enchanting moments within the fabric of our everyday life through collecting stories from individuals. It delves into the themes of play, belonging, material relations, rituals, and movements that might help us transcend the physical boundaries we perceive. These stories and experiences shape our identities, and thus the project serves as a transformative call, shifting the contemporary narrative to one of boundless possibilities, one step at a time by following the lines of flight. To bring the concept to life, I have explored various mediums, including photographs, automatic drawings, sculpture, and sound. Additionally, I've incorporated sketches based on AI-generated images, contributing to the multidimensional nature of the project. The main concept that the project is based on is achieving Jung's third stage of the non-rational, which is enchantment. My research started with the second stage called wasteland, where you feel a sense of disconnect from the world you inhabit. The state is known to be a result of an imbalance between nature and culture, logic and spirit. It's a place where our sense of belonging is lost, and by extension, so is our sense of responsibility. A place where we constantly feel the presence of a void that needs filling. I was looking for a solution, and that's when I stumbled on a book called The Enchanted Life by Sharon Blackie, who's a psychologist and a mythologist. It is through this book that I first got introduced to the key pillars of enchantment, thinking about how we participate in our environments, cultivating a sense of wonder, an embodied form of living, and exploring our mythic imagination, in order to transcend a lot of the rigid structures that we've often find ourselves confined in. Another key source of inspiration was The Enchantment of Modern Life by Jane Bennett, who's a political theorist and a philosopher, also being one of the key thinkers spearheading the new materialism theory. Here she makes a case for enchantment for the sake of joy and a case for joy for the sake of ethics. By bringing into discussion various ideas and philosophies through time, one of them being A Body Without Organs by Deleuze and Guattari. which is essentially a body that doesn't oppose organs, but opposes organization. It is a multi-species, an ongoing project of becoming in which new links are forged among things, plants, animals, tools, people, power, and fragments of all of these. It explores new ways in which one might live, giving us a structure which is more flexible, addressing us as beings in constant flow, as verbs always becoming. Deleuze and Guattari provided us with a set of rules that can help guide individuals to discovering their own body without organs, encouraging the exploration of personalized formulas through technique, exercise, posture, movements, and rituals. And that is when the project comes in. Based on these rules and Sharon's key themes, I ask every participant in this project a list of questions in our first interaction, questions that explore their life stories and experiences. I also show them a lot of images and see which are the ones that stick, for they always act as wonderful catalysts in accessing memories and dreams. And it is through these interviews that I build up the database of rituals and stories, of moments of revelations and of transformation and all other essential things. Now, before I jump onto the second meeting where I take their images, I'd like to make some notes on the visual language that I use and where it finds its roots. The visual language that I found myself drawn to as carrying an essence of enchantment seemed to carry certain repeating characteristics. It was in a sense of movement in this painting by Van Gogh, a sense of intimacy in this one by David Hockney, a childlike excitement in this digital sketch by Hockney, and in this beautiful dreamscape by Tim Walker, in this leap by Yves Klein, a sense of hope in this photograph by Alex Soth, of freedom in Ryan McGinley's work, and many other enchanting visuals. Next, I sifted through my phone's photos to see where any remnants of moments of pure presence remained, thinking about the interplay of this language between fiction and reality. Surprisingly, it was the tiniest of details that unlocked those moments. Now, getting back to the second meeting where I make some images of people based on the stories that they had shared. When I tried to use the same language that I just spoke about, something felt off. The visual language in the case of the ideas I was exploring felt distant, too put together, too far, something of dreams, and definitely not my constant reality. The other things that was really important and needed stressing on was that you don't necessarily have to go to a far-off place to experience the sense of wonder and joy. It is about experiencing it in your present environment. And also addressing the fact that it is not a once achieved forever constant state. It's something you build up to again and again. And it was important for the visual language to embody those other steps along the way as well. So it speaks to a sense of reality instead of a distant dream. One that focuses on stories as the guiding principle and rituals as an exercise to help sustain us. I call these images portraits, not of fixed identities, but of experiences shared by many, for they are what form the basis of our shifting identities. Exploring the reflective nature of images, I play with the language of photography, oscillating between who-ness and itness, a moment where space has been left for the narrative of the viewer to enter, which is what makes this portrait of experience personal, depending on where the viewer is in the river, one that happens to be circular. But it still felt like it was too thought through. What of uncertainty, of the intuitive, of the shadow side, of the unconscious? A lot of the times when we've been a part of particular structure for too long, it's difficult to point out any problems simply because we've grown habitual to them. All we know is a nagging sense that something is wrong. This is what got me wondering about the repeating patterns that exist today and the possible ways to bring them to our attention. That's when AI crossed my mind. It's something that draws from the biggest data set that we have, the internet. So I started feeding an AI image generating software with text from the interviews to see how it interprets the experience and how it connects to my version of it in the images that I'd taken. I then make sketches from this pool of AI-generated images in an attempt to make note of our collective symbols, devoid of distractions and acting as portals to the collective cave that holds our secrets. and through them is how I further expand this narrative. For the next steps of the project, I've been thinking about tacit memory and the possibilities of accessing it through automatic making and expressing. As Jung had once said, often the hands will solve a mystery that the intellect has struggled with in vain. I believe it is what the old king in The Alchemist was referring to when he said language of the world, the language through which the boy understood the sheep and the sheep understood the boy. It is an intuitive language we've all experienced from time to time. And as it goes for any language, the more you practice it, the better you get at it. I believe honing this language is essential, for it's one that will help us further connect, not only to each other, but also to our non-human selves, for it's a language we all share. And I'm only beginning to explore the potential in that. In the context of choreographic practices, I have come to perceive it as a delicate interplay of navigation between the various dualities that I've encountered during my research. These dualities encompass the realms of thinking and doing, logic and spirit, conscious and unconscious, who-ness and itness, a photograph and an AI-generated image, fiction and non-fiction, and the personal and the collective. When comes a point where I feel like I've put too much thought into it, when I feel it's beginning to become too rigid, I break away and go on a chain of instinctive experiments. And then I reconcile these with intuitive explorations with a more thoughtful approach through further research. This process enables me to make out how these elements can intricately interweave, enriching and refining the structure of my practice. A harmonious movement between thoughtful contemplation and uninhibited experimentation, ultimately culminating in a dynamic and purposeful expression. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
So I think I'm next. I'm just going to share my screen. And my sound. Great. Yeah. No, again, I know everyone's been expressing it, but just very thankful to be on this first ever Critical Symposium. And thank you, Tony, for chatting to all of us and bringing us together in this sort of collective. Yeah, no, it's really a privilege to be part of this. So thank you. My practice is based in sort of experiences of listening, and my body of work, I've been currently sort of researching this idea of sonic contamination. So it sort of inspired one of the sort of key texts that utilises this term contamination is Anna Singh's work, The Mushroom at the End of the World. So she talks about contamination as sort of a more collaborative moment of encounter between humans, beings, spaces. And so this like term, like everyone carries a history of contamination, purity is not an option. So following on from that, I found that really a massive inspiration for me in how I carry out my work. And my work follows this sort of rhizomatic like approach. So I tend to I was exploring ways of listening, and the output that I'm going to talk to you about, I had like lots of different outputs all at the same time. So there was no sort of like central point as a way that we can find this sort of deeper level of understanding of something that I'm still trying to comprehend and work out. So sonic contamination is a series of outcomes challenging our role and the perceptions we have towards species on different scales of being, primarily looking at the microscale, where there's this like constant level of collaboration and contamination. So my role, I'm trying to attempt as an artist, is to bridge audiences empathetically to the intermingling microworlds around us through different forms of sound, performance, and story-led works, creating experiences stemming from field recordings and listening to living systems and environments. So I'm sort of asking the question of how do we as beings become more consciously connected to the microworlds within and beyond us? And is it possible to develop deeper relational understanding and care in listening? So here are some of my other texts that I found deeply inspirational. I love this like phrase that Carlo Rovelli uses in his work, time our legion. So the thought, the thought that every being, every place, every moment carries its own time. The world is a mass, a galaxy, a universe of different times. And so I found that really interesting to see how can we bridge between these or get audiences to really truly empathetically connect with that idea that feels like very like hard to always comprehend. So when I was exploring my own practice, I found I was struggling in the past with a lot of apathy with how I move through the world and trying to find this stillness. And I had these experiences of recording, creating soundscapes of these sites. So one of them was this moment in Glenshee in Scotland where I was using contact mics, listening to moss, and I was just immediately transported to this scale of being. So what I was doing, I was picking up the vibrations of the moss, these like intricate tiny movements. So again, kind of bringing back to the choreography ideas that we're talking about here, I was kind of using the vibrational choreography of these micro movements, and how through being able to capture these, I was like immediately transported. And in that listening transportation, I was for that moment in my own perception of being still, it was the first time that I'd sat still for like more than 20 minutes, just like listening deeply to this world that for me you would just pass through, not take that moment. And then secondly, I had this opportunity I created trying to record again from the perspective of something that is imperceivable for us to hear on our human scale of being. So looking at bacterial fermentation and trying to create a soundscape that sort of truly transports the listener to this kind of micro scale, this nanoscale, where all these factories of bacteria kind of working together and creating, transforming, collaborating, all of these things going on that happen all the time, all around us, within our bodies and beyond. But for us, it's so hard. Like, we know this, but how can we truly kind of empathetically connect with these ideas? I felt that there was a distinct when I'm chatting to audience members, there's that moment where they went through the listening, they seem to have this clearer connection to those ideas. So from these listening-led personal experiences, I went about designing a workshop, sort of following on from the ideas of Pauline Oliveros and flow state. And this idea, I took people out and we were sort of, first of all, listening in the space without any headphones and just choosing a spot in the environment that I'd chosen. And this was important because the spots that they chose, I used the term time species, that they'd chosen their own time species. So again, going back to that idea that every being, every moment carries its own scale of time. And then they went through a different series of exercises. Then we traveled around collectively together, and I mounted up contact microphones. So we had this like extended form of collective listening. And through those different exercises of touch, feel, movement in the space, but with the contact mics, you hear again those micro vibrational changes, and it just created these really interesting sort of spaces of discussion where people were noticing their movement, but how it also joined this cacophony of sound that they could now hear, which could be from insects and that we don't normally hear, but they transmit through vibrations around the sort of environments they're in. Or if we were connected to wood, it's picking up all of those other vibrations that we don't normally hear in the environment around. So this is just like a little a little capture from some of those workshops, where I also gave them sort of workbooks as well, where they could draw freely kind of their perspective of how they exist in those spaces, and seeing if those reflections changed from the listening experiences. And what was really lovely is, as we were traveling around the spaces, like, people were able to, when we just took that extra moment and change the perspective of where we were being, so I was getting people to sort of like bend down and look at the moss in a different way, then they went off in their own way. And it was interesting seeing how they then moved in these spaces, just taking their time and noticing these smaller things that we normally would just walk past, and how they kind of collaborated with the space. So following on from that, I then actually was collaborating with Prisha, who's on our Zoom call today, who taught me this massive breakthrough in my practice using this process called chromatography. So I was trying to look at a way that you could kind of have this like visual snapshot of these points that people decide to record, so that kind of it kind of gave that kind of glimpse of that temporality that we were listening to, specifically on that kind of chemical micro level as well, where the contaminations and the interactions are, you know, going on all the time. So using this method of chromatography, I took soil samples from the different sites that my participants at the workshops chose, and created these sort of like trace images of those sites. And I just felt that helped also give this sort of visual anchor for those to understand and appreciate these little trace moments. So moving on from then, I worked with musicians and got them to listen to and use their improvisational skills to work with the field recordings I'd been collecting, and created a performance piece that took place in a forest. And we had, and this is the score that you can see, and we had our human performers, saxophone, violin, and a modular synth, which was great. And then we had our non-human performer, which was Moss. So I sort of live amplified the Moss in the space, so we could also have that as a performance. And this performance again, like used these different exercises of listening. So the performers went through different phases, and we sort of were kind of wanting to explore collaboratively that individual voice, moving then together slowly to have a more polyphonic formation, this kind of collaborative listening together at the end. This is a tiny little part of it, if you can hear it. Hopefully. So just going back to that, it was just interesting. I'm on the other slide, just don't want the video to replay. I think it was really interesting, like working with those performers, and so the sort of sounds that they're creating, again, kind of like these fragmented bits of score that came from the different field recordings I had of specific beings. So one of them was moss, one of them was a trunk, one of them was in a pond, and the other one was some birds curlew. So that was just really interesting as a kind of material basis for them to work with. So the next thing I then was also exploring alongside these was a way of like reflecting upon this like map of contamination relationships in these different environments. So again, I went back to the forest, Epping Forest, was where I was carrying out the workshops, and took lots and lots of like different site samples, and worked again collaboratively with Prisha, working up this method of how could we incorporate all these different chromatographies, but on the same piece of medium, and that medium is textile. And so we had lots of different we sort of worked together working out what method we could do, and then incorporated together this sort of final piece, which basically is all the traces all together, and it's like a kind of contamination map of this environment, which I thought was really interesting, like all these different listing sites, how they could look visually, how the chemical data has sort of expanded and intertwined within each other on its own method. So we, you know, when I'm carrying out this method, just setting it up, these samples, and they create the traces, there's no other kind of interaction, and this is sort of this kind of organic kind of choreography of chemicals, which is really interesting, which I absolutely love this method. Obviously I'm from kind of a sonic practice, and using this form of visualization of the sounds that I'm fascinated in and the relationships of them, just felt right. So that's something I'm carrying on exploring. Oh, there was a film I did, but we have to look at that. There's a bit of that. Okay. Okay, so finally. So I created this piece called the Sonic Biome. So I really wanted to look at like a kind of more installation piece and a touch-based piece that lots of audiences could interact and understand this kind of concept of sonic contamination. This involved creating a textile through using the bundle dyeing method, again picking up the traces from the forest. You can see the sort of visuals that were left behind, and these tiny little trace visuals, which was really interesting. And then I worked with conductive thread, creating these like rhizomatic patterns that were taken from photography I was doing of the tree canopy in Epping Forest, and took these kind of fragments and they came together on this piece. And then underneath there are speaker drivers that all come together and resonate this board that the textile is mounted upon. And so here's a little showing you how it works, and I can talk a bit more about it. I don't know if you can hear it. I can't hear anything at the moment. No, okay, it's fine. I'll just talk about it, it's fine. So how the sonic biome works is that as you touch the conductive threaded embroidery, it triggers a soundscape of a particular being that basically adapts to the level of basically resistance that your hand is expressing into the textile, so people can lie upon it, and as they're touching it and making contact, these sounds resonate that board that they're on. And so it's a really interesting way of how can audiences you know, have their own motion and movement to a piece that also expresses this kind of level of contamination sonically. What I and this is like, these are visuals captured from my setup for the final show, and what was really interesting is young and old really instinctually sort of worked with the piece, touching, playing, and it was that excitement where they felt that change in sound as they were touching it. And I think it's interesting trying to make these accessible experiences through movement and play, how it was in that body movement that people were starting to really understand the kind of concepts I was trying to share with them, as how we as beings move through the world and leave our traces, but how that can be reflected sonically. So you would touch it and you could hear those changes through the sounds. Yeah, I think that's about me done. So I'll finish there. Thank you for listening.
Sorry, let me figure out this really quick. So can you guys see my screen? Okay. All right. So again, thank you, Tony, for arranging this opportunity. And I'm really glad to be included in this first session. And the theme, choreography, really helped myself develop some ideas, as I never relate my work to this term before. So for my presentation, I would like to start with locating the word choreography a little, and then locate some of my works in the framework. So in the interview, William Forsythe used to say once that I am an artist who works in the medium of choreography, and that does not exclude any context for working as an artist in choreography. So these words kind of triggered my interest for the first time, as it seems not saying anything, but still says a lot. So the word choreography derives from the Greek for dance and for rite. By literal meaning is just the art of creating and arranging dances. But in the context of contemporary art, choreographic practice is like a vague and curious idea, much more than dancing itself and more than body movement or just movement. It's about like designing, curating, staging, creating and arranging movement. That's my personal understanding. And choreographic practices are kind of based on the principle that movements or gestures embody ideas and can be productively enlivened when considered as a mode of critical and creative discourse. So I like to simply go through some of my works that more or less apply choreography as a strategy. So this is called series GR2192. It's an ongoing multimedia project, including photography, performance, and sculptures. It's my collaboration with artist and photographer Yunshan Jiang. Right now, this project is on stage 1. It's just photography. The idea originated from my investigation into the historical archives of the Darcy Island leprosy colony in BC, Canada during the 19th century. And this colony mostly housed Chinese patients who were quarantined and essentially left to die at that time. And the research experienced some difficulties due to legal restrictions. And then I switched my focus to the digital records of leprosy patients from the Wellcome collections. And then after I went through a large number of the files, I started to notice the body gestures, the poses of the patients in front of the camera, the loss of sense of privacy or shame. It's like their natural and even performative exposure of body parts somehow feels like the boundary between medical documentation and fashion documentation is blurred. I'm sorry that I couldn't show these pictures here because I am not allowed to. But from a broader context, I care about the intertwined narratives of history, race, health, and memories resonate with what happened during COVID and post-COVID. But in particular, I care about the role of gazing in the power relations happening together with disease and aging. And also this research I found really connected to Tony's research, the historical documentation of the bodies, the study of the other's body and normalizing poses. But our ways of responding to the themes are quite different. So I'll show some more pictures. So I invited this model, Sana Kelly, for the photo shooting. So I invited her to interact with some metal fragments that I made. These fragments are all from a disease armor that I designed. But in the end, I just decided to just leave them to be fragments, like armor fragments. And my only instruction for Sana was to just take each piece as the type of disease or just apart from her body based on this, and she could feel free to act. So basically, I choreographed her at the same time she get choreographed herself. And so a choreographic scene like series GR2192, it's like an observation of a kind of choreography that can only be performed by humans. And this is something that cannot be accomplished by another object because the object itself is thinking and the object is forming its own state out of an agreed upon set of rules. And another piece I like to show is called User Manual, If My Hand is a Sexual Organ. This is also an ongoing multimedia project, including writing, art books, videos, and installations. It is my long-term project that delves into themes of sex, instructions, intimacy, and cultural identities with kind of post-humanist strategies. At this stage, the project consists of 2 art books, User Manual 1 and User Manual 2. I'd like to just highlight the basic setting of the User Manual 1 as it itself is choreography, and it is formatted in the style of a quintessential user manual. And it presents a fictional reproductive system to be implanted into the human hand by instructing customers/readers on how to use this non-existent product. The user manual reimagined the relationship between the body, gender identity, and technology in an absurdist manner. And the book itself is a recording of this process, choreographing our hand, our sex, and even our existing understandings. And also, this work was made in my first year at RCA. It's right now temporarily an installation set including 4 sculptures connected by wires. And I suggest you see them as a whole, as a body, a schizophrenic, disorganized body composed of a brain, a heart, an upper body part, and a lower body part. And the brain is an Arduino board with sensors, and the heart is 2 kinetic actuators. And while they are moving disorderly on the floor, at the same time being tied to the other 2 sculptures separately. Here are some videos of the actuators. So the actuators have received a choreography and they react randomly according to the audience moving speed and distance with them. So they perform an actual, like a human spectacle. And the choreography is like in between, on the one hand, the actuators, the sculptures, the wires, and of course, the audience in the room. So there's like a multi-layer relationship happening at the same time. Maybe that is also what I have imposed this project, because I am kind of lost on this stuff as I need to reconsider why it is necessary for me to choreograph everything here. And what we have now is actuators being plugged from industry, having an industrial task and being placed in this context, and then being given, let's call like an interactive or poetic task. And then when that is over, they disappear. And the actuators themselves have neither intelligence nor will, but you cannot avoid being with them because they are programmed to translate your motion into their own motion. So when I first preparing this small presentation, I'm thinking of themes like exploring embodiment through choreographic practice, because I've been working with body a lot. And then talking about the ideas of embodiment, our awareness of the bodily substances and how our functions and relations define what it is to be human, etc. But then as I recap my recap of my practice goes on, I start to realize what we are considering of choreography is like more of a abstracted manifestation of choreographic ideas instead of the historical forms of its enactment, such as dance. It is pretty different. And for me, the way to situate the idea of choreography in my practice, or to say to situate my practice as choreographic practice, is the fact that choreography itself is like a really vague and broad scene that fundamentally determines our ability to detach and review something from positions of certainty. So that is it. Thank you.
Hey, thank you everyone for sharing their work. So we are actually like running out of time, but we are still going to do the discourse, like critical discourse. So is there something that would someone like to start responding to someone's work, or does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts, or I mean, please feel free to ask. But I was making some notes when all of you were like doing your presentations. And Ron, you were saying you were showing the quote at the beginning of your presentation about choreography, and then you're talking about that you haven't really thought of your work as choreographic work.
That's right. Never thought about that.
Yeah, so I wonder, like, I wonder to what extent, like, many artists work as choreographic elements within them, or like, how does that come about? How do you come about, like, identifying your work as choreographic or not? Because based on the code that you are showing, like, I think to an extent, any sort of artistic practice carries or embodies or carries through some ideas of choreography within them. So I mean, I would love to, like, open it for discussion to anyone. Yeah. So
Well, because I used to thought like choreography is more about dancing, about body movement, about performance. And then after digging into my own practice, I would say that in a broader context, all artists work with choreography. And it's not about like physical appearance, but more of the idea behind the physical and how the choreography work with instruction, work with something to detach some existing certainty. That's what I would define choreography at this moment. Yeah, so for a more physical way of saying that, it's easier to understand choreography as to curate, to design a scene, and to, of course, a body or physical thing in the scene would be really stand out and to embody the idea. But if you have to go broader, everything is a choreography. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, if anyone has some opinions on that, like, you can share it. But I was also thinking about like how when we're like sharing our work, we were all looking at choreography from that broader sense. We weren't sticking to the certainty of choreography just with, as you said, movement. But we were like approaching choreography in terms of technology that we used, non-human entities involved, materials that were used, or exploring materials that embody choreography, and also even like maybe materials that got displaced in that choreographic process, and also even like questioning who is a choreographer. When we think of a choreographer, what I think is, what comes in my mind is someone who directs dance. But then, as some of you were talking about in your practice, I think what was interesting that I was realizing was how you were like sort of shifting the focus, shifting the attention of shifting the role of the choreographer to on giving agency to other sort of entities or aspects within your practice. And I found that really interesting, the questioning of and then who, and in that process, I think it gains some agency, that materials or processes gain agency in themselves. And in many instances, as some of you shared, like it was directing the audience to act a certain way or conduct themselves, like with Laura, what I found interesting was how you were saying that, like when older or younger people, when they were sort of interacting with your work, they started, and it was through that sense of like that sensorial haptic affect that they started understanding the world, and in that way they are being choreographed, in their own ways, based on the way they were sort of responding to the experience, not the experience, but responding to the haptics, and gaining from that. And also like Ran, you had the user manual, which was again becomes a sort of instruction for uh, acting in certain ways. And Mushtaba, like you were talking about, I think in your work, there was this like simultaneously, there was like this, it was like an amalgamation of choreography of obviously body, like, but along with the sound, the music, as well as, even in the installation, you had that show reel going on on your screen. So there was also choreography embodied within that. Within that as well. And I was also thinking about, like you had that piece of the paper telling that you were missing and stuff. And it was really interesting, even with like the others, your work was sort of bringing out certain ways of responding. And in your case, I think there was this idea like lamentation or sorrow that like people were, I guess, experiencing to some extent, or from experiencing it work. And also like I was also thinking of like the choreography of war, because you were talking about war, and I was just thinking about the choreography involved in that. Like how would you think about that? How would you because I know that you like work intentionally with the idea of choreography. Like, is there how would you think about that or approach that intentionally in your practice?
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, I think I would like to agree with Ren, because I find everything is rightfully choreographically done, and in my work as well, because I find that choreographing someone's mind is again an approach to direct somebody to look at a particular thing in a certain way. Like, because if I talk about my work again and refer to it, so people were not expecting that they were coming to a show and experiencing someone's passing, and from that point, you are directing them to think in other way. and enforcing them and giving them with a shock element at the show. So again, I mean, how you I also find the Socratic dialogue very practical in every aspect of life, because what is justice, what is pain, what is sorrow, what is direction, what is choreographing thing. So it's very open-ended terminologies, and one really needs to define and and I also find it's there's no fixed definition of any word, anything. So things get uh, evolved, and and it's a very constant ongoing process of change that we experience in everything, really. So yeah, I mean for instance, the talk that we're having right now is very choreographically, done by you. So I mean, how I even how I merchandise my surrounding is again very choreographic approach, and I think, yeah, I mean, I find it yeah, so many things overlapping with other things all the time.
And Junshu, like when you're sharing your practice, um, I've seen your work before, and you have shown me like maps of you walking around in different cities, and yeah, and it's very interesting, like how, I mean, you're a flanner, you're in Copenhagen, you're visiting places, you walk a lot, and you look and observe things. So I find it interesting how like the the built environment or the architecture, if you can call it, sort of navigates that choreographic process of you, like when we are thinking of it from a bodily perspective. And also in the images, and not image, the video that you were sharing of like the quarantine videos, like they were all happening indoors within the spaces of a built environment. So I don't know if there's like something that you wanna, like, if there's something in your mind which you would like to share in terms of like choreography, body, and also like the environment, because you keep visiting places and traveling. And is there something that you have picked up relating to that? Oh no, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Okay, maybe there's some issue with your uh, okay, so maybe we can come back to Jinshu. And Naja has a question, like feel free to ask or type if you prefer.
Yeah, hi, and thanks everyone for showing
Hi.
your work and sharing. All of that was really generous. But I guess I have a specific question for Laura. Thinking about choreography, do you think maybe that you've choreographed a kind of relationship between people and nature? And then what would you think about that? Like maybe the idea of choreographing a relationship?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it kind of like it implies this like element of control on something that you shouldn't really just letting to evolve. But I think that's what my practice is sort of trying to facilitate, these sort of experiences that can grow this deeper kind of conscious connection. And yeah, I guess I think the workshops was one of the most powerful outputs that I was exploring, because it's sharing these ideas with, you know, lots of different people coming from lots of different experiences they've had in their lives so far, and getting them to, I think it was the collective listening and the collective kind of choreographic elements of going through those exercises, moving in the space, that was had them some of the most interesting outputs, because it was like the bodily sonic captures. So like as people kind of shifting their weight together and hearing that sonically, the kind of discussions we had was really interesting. So it's a kind of weird one, because I guess I would feel sort of, I would want to be careful at, you know, having that kind of, I guess, holding the mantle of choreographing anyone's sort of relationship in a space, because obviously that's a very individual experience, but it's quite interesting coming up with exercises that can allow people to comfortably explore what a relationship could be on that sonic level, that helps them hear how their presence exists in spaces in this sort of extended listening experience.
I thought it was really romantic, the idea of kind of touching something and then listening to these kind of whispers coming from I guess like the forest. But yeah, I don't know, I thought there was like a way of really romanticizing that, which you didn't maybe talk about as much, so I thought that was interesting.
No, it's so that Epping Forest, it's quite an important site for me. So my grandmother, when she passed away, we spread her ashes in that part of the forest, so that's why I visited there. And some of my earlier work was sort of exploring the site, and I was I'm a violinist, and so I was sort of like improvising while listening to trying to record within sort of these trunks or the pond or these areas. So that is interesting that you've said that, because obviously I didn't mention that when I was showing my work, but there is quite I guess it's an intimate part of my history that you know, I don't necessarily share that with people when I'm doing the workshops in that location, but that may have influenced how I go through that specific space. And I guess having that element of gentleness and just taking that extra moment. And I think that has then translated to lots of other different spaces that I record. So I've been doing lots of recording in Croydon, where I live, like with the concrete structures, which aren't necessarily as organic as a forest, but they hold their own vibrations, which is really interesting. But I guess having that gentleness and what you said, it's really interesting, because that specific location, Epping Forest, has quite a, you know, deep and resonant meaning for me personally. So when I was sharing that part of my practice, it's interesting you said that. Thanks.
Jinshu, do you want to like step in? Let's see if your mic is working.
Yeah.
It's working, we can hear you.
Yeah. Back to the question, I think for me, more like the starting point is happened indoors space. Yeah, because of the limitation of space, we feel anxious, got some anxiety, and we have the eager to step out. So that is why I borrowed the term of boat of the line of escape. So I was trying to think about the relationship between indoor space and when I was trying to plenary in the city, because it is the process I more like daily ritual when I try to develop the city. But finally, the starting point is indoor space, and finally I will be back to home and step into the indoor space again. Yeah, so try to think about or make a dialogue between two different scenario. Yeah. That's it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I
I
wanted to
wanna,
say something as well,
Yeah.
because I walk a lot as well in the city. And do you feel that something changed when you moved to London? Like, did you,
Yeah.
like when you were back home, was it the same, the ritual of walking around the city, or did something change when you moved here?
Yeah, you got the point, because for the first year, my practice it's more about the misalignment between Beijing and London, the different different feeling, and when you're flannery in the city, when I came before I came to London, I got quite a lot of information, like report music and something else. And through internet, people in my generation, we listen to tapes, CD to access those kind of Western culture things. Yeah, but that's in my imagination, more like some, how say. But when I finally finally in London, I found there is a misalignment between my imagination and the real physical space. Yeah, and try to. That's why I finally back to the fold. I feel like there is maybe something not in the right place. Yeah, so that is the starting point, more like the loose, how say, describe Francis Bacon's paintings always got a vanishing point, and you can escape from that point, step into somewhere. Yeah, that's the starting point of my practice, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Naja, you had a question?
Yes. I was curious to know, when you're, I guess, kind of touching this fabric, which is from the image that you showed us, that you found in the British Library. I was curious to know how does it feel, maybe, to think about these people in the past who, obviously in a kind of really messed up way, were almost kind of dehumanized by this gaze that we're talking about. Maybe this question hasn't got much to do with choreography, but I was just curious to know what kind of thoughts you had while you were performing, or what you were feeling, and whether you knew you'd feel that way before you went into it. Yeah, that's my questions.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting, as it's starting to make me think about like the way I approached these documents, the choreography sort of that I did in handling these books, and when I went to like see these books, it's sort of in their like archives, in their manuscripts section in the British Library. So like it's like you need to take like an appointment with them, and you need to go to like a certain room, and because these are like records from the 18th and 19th century, so they have conserved it like really well. And when I was going through the books, I think it was very surreal. I think that's what I remember thinking when I was handling these books. Some of them were written in the 1700s, and with pen and ink. I don't know what pen they would have used. Maybe it's not pen. I don't know. But it was so surreal to handle, to touch the same pages, and the same books, which were sort of like central documents, not just the ones that I showed in the image, but also the books which were sort of records of like the East India Company proceedings. And so it was very surreal to like go through these like legal documents and as well as like visual documents. So and the way you handle these books, like you have to be like really careful with them, because that's how they like, and there's always someone like in that room to make sure that you are handling these books in a proper format. And because these are like really thick books, you can't just like keep it on the table, like flat on the table and view them. They give you like a cushioned thing to like support the book so that it doesn't like bend open too much. So and like damage it. So I think there's a whole choreography involved in that sort of conservation, preservation, and the way you're supposed to go through these archival materials. But yes, I think, yeah, it was very like surreal to feel the pages, run my hand through the ink and realizing that these were like central documents, which at a point were very crucial within that whole system of colonization and, in that whole system of propagating control. Yeah. And also, like I didn't like mention this in my presentation, but when I made the fabric in grids, the gridded textile piece which I got woven, I was very particular to get it woven in like wool, which is sourced from England, because I was really interested in, the grid in that images are like a British mechanism, a colonial British mechanism to sort of identify when other bodies. So in my installation, I really still wanted to like maintain the integrity of the grid, but I wanted to use wool because it was really interesting, because wool is a very soft material, and then I was sort of resting my body in it. So I was really interested in that sort of juxtaposition of ideas or approach towards the grid. And I wasn't like approaching it, I guess, in a very literal way, but I was trying to. I think there's also ideas of haptics involved in it, haptics involved in that to sort of generate ideas of care, because it was through touch that I was resting or understanding the grid, or like even embracing in a certain way. Yeah. I have a question for Prisha. I found it really interesting. I mean, you're talking about Deleuze and Guattari's body without organs. I mean, I personally don't know. I don't know if others know about it, but I would love to hear more about it. And we're also talking about like the idea of duality, and that's how you were approaching choreography. Like it seemed like very much like there was a choreography within your thinking process when you were, which was which seemed to be so integral to your artistic practice. This sort of going back and forth, or reflecting on, these dual concepts, if we can call them that. I really found that interesting, in where it becomes a sort of like thought process or a mental process, a cognitive choreographic process, if we call it that, which holds a very like central part in your practice. But I wonder if there's anything that you would like to, if there's anything more that you would like to share, and also, like, you were talking about emotions and choreography. So I'm really interested in how you approach choreography from its affect perspective, as like a subjective perspective and also like a cognitive perspective. So that you weren't like really containing it within the corporeal or like the physical, you know. So is that how you like always, like, I wonder to what extent it is intentional, or is it not intentional at all in your practice?
For my practice always sort of starts with the idea of movement, because what I do is the first thing that I started doing when I came to London is I started walking through the city, and every day, and that's why I had the question for Junshu as well, because I'd make maps as well. Every single time I'd move around the city, and I feel like that's what helped me connect, because I would see like there's a particular bench that I'd go sit on every day, or there's a particular view in the river that I'd go see. So it's things like those that help me connect to the city, and that came through moving through the city again and again. So and that's when I started thinking about rituals as well, and what are the kind of things that we can do sort of ritualistically, repetitively in the city to sort of connect back to our environment, sort of getting away from the notion that you have to, you know, travel really far to connect to nature, or like how do you sort of be present where you are in your current environment, and how do you connect to it? Because the idea of care and responsibility are really important in my practice, where you won't feel like you're responsible for the place unless and until you have a sense of connection to that place, unless and until you feel like you're an extension of it or a part of it. So how do you connect back to your environment? So that was really important. And one of the things that's one of the techniques in the body without organs. It's this thing, it's body without organs is basically this set of intensities, which is in constant movement. So it's about sort of being in a constant state of flow and acknowledging that. So it's a state, it's never an achieved state, but it's always one that is becoming. So whenever you're in this, if you take like a screenshot of this body without organs, it'll be like sparks going all over, because so the idea of embracing lightness and living your life as a verb, as a happening, instead of something fixed, instead of something, now this is who I am, but sort of taking things as they come and seeing what you can do with them. So it's basically this mechanism. So you don't really fall into the idea of breaking the structure, because that becomes even more problematic. That's when you're in sort of free fall. So it's about how do you reorganize that structure into one that is more possible. And that is how it sort of, that's the very basic take on body without organs.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I'll definitely like check it out. I know we're running our time, and I just realized that we didn't do like a recap of our Truman Show. So if any of you have to leave, I mean, please feel free. But I would love to like do like a small recap of your experience, like setting up or showing or receiving response, or what you even understood from your own practice, you know, as an audience viewing your own work. You know, what did you gain, any perspectives, any thoughts? But before that, I see Naja has a question for Mujtaba. I don't know if you want to like ask it, or if Mujtaba would prefer to just say it, or maybe I can read out the question which Naja sent. You choreographed this experience for the viewer where they had to confront a very upsetting thing you staged death. I was wondering whether this made you feel bad. Do you feel less bad when you're approaching this in a sort of era and of fake news? What do you think about that emotional responsibility? I think that's a really interesting question. Excited to hear what Mushtaba has to say.
Yeah, indeed, it is. So sorry because I have, ongoing allergies and sneezing. So sorry for that. But yeah, I mean, I staged death for sure. But I think I enjoy whenever I shock people through my work. I love working with risk, with some unexpected news. Maybe all the time I do comment on a lot of stuff, especially referring to the Noam Chomsky's book, manufacturing the consent, or maybe so more. So yeah, I mean, I don't feel so sad that I made anybody uncomfortable, but I feel accomplished that I provided them with an opportunity to rethink about the news, about the loss, about the parallel reality, within our comfort zone, because it's very easy to live your own life with all those luxury, but it's very hard for anyone to, step out and to see someone else's world uh, through the empathetic eye. So I think, yeah, yeah.
I mean, if I may add to that, I was just thinking about, I think your work also brought out, like, in addition to making people rethink about their own stance and how they approach, news, I think especially with the book that you had, I think it really brought out like the ways in which people care and what matters to them as well. And as you said, people were writing about your hair, and then you purposefully wanted to like not show your hair in today's like forum. So I think it was an exercise also to show like what do people care about, and how they even respond to news, as you said. So I think that was really an interesting thing to think about and expand on.
Yeah, I think
I
now
just
I'm more mindful and I'll take more care of my hair, because very soon I'll also be posting some videos regarding my hair routine, just to respond to that two comments, because I found them extremely interesting, and started me to think about to make new works maybe. Yeah.
I wanted to add something, if that's okay, Mujtaba. I mean, I wanted to add to the question. So you're saying that like even if let's say we weren't living in this kind of like post-truth world or whatever, I think that's kind of where Chomsky goes with what he's writing. But like even if we weren't in that kind of what you're saying is that because this is something that's so ignored, or it's something that's so possible to have to confront this reality that's happening, in the world. You feel less bad because you think people should feel sad sometimes thinking about this, or at least that should be acknowledged, or that's something that should be experienced.
Yeah, because it was also a comment on a very recent event that took place in one of the mainstream medias, where a journalist actually, and he was reporting an event from Ukraine and the current invasion by Russia, and eventually he started speaking about that we need to be very responsive to the refugees coming from Ukraine, because they are blonde and they have blue eyes. So again, because to give your opinion as a journalist, it's not your core responsibility. It's not your job. We just need to report an event. So, and it was from one of the very mainstream medias. So yeah, I intentionally wanted to make people feel about it, that it's not about if the race is similar. It's not about if they have those blue eyes, but it's more like that they are human as you. They are human as my own beloved people, So yeah, just to shake those binaries and just to shake those very concrete segments that we have created on our own in our society.
I feel like the morality in this is so delicate. Some of this, what you're saying, because I keep thinking in a way that surely if somebody just realizes that you haven't actually died, then they'd feel a bit like they've been duped. But it's not about you in a way. It's just about X who went through this or could have done this. And I feel like that's like a thin thread to go on, to kind of like say, well, it's okay because.
Yeah, and also feel it's very interesting if you leave an impression to your viewer to after experiencing your artwork and leaving that space and going back to their place and thinking about that event, thinking about that very, very little thing, maybe, it could be of anything. And, just to shake them a little bit and, and ask them to please rethink, and please be mindful of whatsoever, even the pieces of news that we get every day from different media. So we need to be very conscious that how much the truth it has and what maybe the agenda it may have, maybe, So yeah, I love that notion.
Maybe a title for your work could be you wouldn't have cared if I hadn't lied to you.
Yeah, I think those interpretations I really enjoy when people make. That's why I don't want to confine my work with giving them with any title, So yeah, I really liked it.
I feel like maybe we should just like do a quick recap of our experience in the show, and because I don't want to like take too much time of everyone's. I mean, is that maybe I can start with mine. Like I'll quickly share mine. I mean, with my experience was basically like, I mean, the space that I think we all had space issues, but I think it was really interesting for me to locate, because I think what I really find exciting about my own art practice is the sort of critical discourse that I can generate or can be generated through my art practice. And I think that's what motivates me to practice. I think maybe I work differently to other artists in that way. So I guess in some ways, this research is very integral. So it was really interesting to see. It was really like interesting to see that I was having difficulty sort of situating the discourse with the practice together in the show. And I think I mean, I guess maybe that really depends, even if you have a research-based practice in some capacity. I think it really depends on your practice as well, maybe, in how it's able to, like, its ability to articulate discourse by itself just through the practice. But I think I was able to understand that I needed to have like an active discourse. I need to engage in an active discourse to situate my practice. So I think it's like a 50-50 thing, like it needs to work, it needs to sit with the discourse. And I think that's where the idea also came, for this forum, so that I would love to hear from you guys as well. Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's my experience. Would love to hear from the others. Anyone wants to go?
Well, I like to follow up Tony's comments on recap the show. For me personally, it wasn't a pleasant experience, to be honest. My only gains from the grad show is I finally know what kind of space that I won't like for my pieces. But one thing I found quite interesting is like my personal connection with Tony's piece, because the works we were showing are quite related, because we are all responding to the historical archive about the post-colonialism response, etc. But for me, my work, I am trying to keep a distance as far as possible. I only like make the what I'm referring is the photography piece. I only made the metal fragments, but I am asking for others to be the model, asking for others to be the photographer, and also I barely be present when I show the works. But for Tony, you are making the blankets by yourself, and then you engage in the photography, be in the photos, and also you did the performance. So you are like doing multitasking, having different roles in the work. So I see this kind of contrast. It's really interesting, and I am curious about, like, what do you feel about your different roles, comparing performance, comparing photos, installations, and your personal timely input into the making blanket. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and I think when I think of my work, I think it's like it's situating at that intersection of performance, installation, photography, sculpture, all together. I think it's hard to draw boundaries between all that. And in terms of my involvement, I think my work was mainly to like question my own subjectivities, like my own subjectivities with relation to like to race and also like queerness. So I think it was an experimental thing for me as well, because I've never like put myself in front of the camera, or I've not really done performance. I've never used my own body within my work. So I think this was a really good experimental opportunity for me to like really explore my practice and see how it see how it would be like. So and taking on all these different roles, sometimes it's what's the word for that? Sorry, it just disappeared from my mind. I mean, I wasn't like really consciously thinking about these different roles when I was making it, and I think it was also a way for me to, in some ways, decolonize myself, like putting me in front of the camera. I wanted to, and also like, my work is also about social control, the control of things that I experience. So I think putting myself in these situations, even though I didn't like consciously think of it while making the work that way, but it just happened that way. But I think it was also an opportunity for me to like question the extent to which I am controlled by things, like how I respond to things, question my subjectivity. So I think it was an experimental opportunity for me, actually. I think taking on these different roles. Yeah. Anyway, long answer. Anyone else wants to go next? Laura.
Next, hi. Yeah, so I felt I was on the second floor, and what was interesting, because it was a bit restricted in how many people could be up there. There wasn't so much of it wasn't like a high density of visitors, which I think put us in for me personally, I felt that was quite a yeah, we were sort of it was privileged to have like that much space between people visiting and for our works, because I was on the information experience design program. A lot of people's works were creating an experience that people had to like, that was their work, so we were able to do that, when normally I know with other shows we don't actually have that much space. So my experience, I had a positive experience with my show run, because I felt there was I was trying to look at it as a way to test out like this first time of having a collection of different outputs, and my main concern was it was like too many things in the same space. I think there's still a lot to learn on that, but it was really nice having that experience of seeing people go through the pieces and ask me questions. I learned so much. So in terms of like aesthetically and maybe the setup, I've got, you know, a few points that I would have ideally wanted and I wasn't able to, had to compromise on. I felt like as an experience, the feedback I received it has been really helpful, and just like seeing people seeing them instinctually interact with my work, I think that just like is so important and so helpful. It was when I wasn't, I mean, I would obviously engage if they asked me questions, but it was when I was sort of like taking a step back and seeing how people kind of naturally encountered it. I think that's really nice. There was a moment where, so I have a film of the performance piece in the forest, and where I'd put the sonic biome, people like added it, they used it as like a seat, but then they didn't realize it was like interactive. So there was some like lovely moments where people were listening and then realizing the thing they were sitting on also was like making sound, and it was like really interesting to play around with that. So there's definitely like lots of things I probably would have wanted to change with like other elements, but I find it really learning. I learned a lot, and I think that's always a sort of a useful thing to take away.
Okay, wonderful. Prisha?
It was a mixed sort of experience for me. And like what I really enjoyed was when people sort of came and looked at the pictures. It was really interesting as to see what were the different pictures that people were getting attracted to, and wondering what they're reflecting on. But the main thing was for me that really stood out in the degree show was that I'd left this blank notebook in the space, and there was like a box of charcoal there, and I felt the same thing, like I think as Laura just mentioned, that if I was in the space, then people weren't like really going and drawing or like interacting with it the way they wanted to. But when there was no one in the space, I literally saw like every 15 seconds, someone was just going and trying to scribble something. And I feel like I couldn't have gotten that sort of engagement if it wasn't for the degree show. Like if it wasn't in a space like that, I wouldn't have had that much amount, like that curated sort of footfall of people who wanted to come and interact with art and then leaving their own marks on it somehow, sort of shifting them from this like passive audience to like active participants in the work itself. And and it's really interesting to go through their marks and the kind of things they expressed and what comes of it. So yeah, overall exciting, I think.
That's exciting. Yay. I don't know if like, I know Naja that you visited the show, but I don't know if you would, as an audience, is there something that you would like to share or?
Yeah, I was having a few conversations about different kind of ways of showing artwork, and I know a lot of you guys are really kind of upset about how condensed maybe it all was because of the lack of like free space or empty space between artworks. And maybe like, I think that like we're used to this idea of getting a kind of space that's really big and really airy, and there's like lots of room to breathe, and the work has this room to breathe. But in a way, like, it's good to subvert that expectation, because I think it's also, historically been quite problematic to stick to this whole, white wall, gray floor thing. And then in a way, like, in the same way that maybe you see these photographs that Tony shared today, which I kind of left like a really like heavy impression on me about this kind of gaze. When you put work in this like really empty-ish space where it's sitting like that, it has that same effect where the gaze is so like it's so kind, what's the word for it? I guess like intrusive, or it's so I don't know. I feel like almost it can play with the way the viewer becomes so much more like above the object, right? I don't know. There's this like thing going on. I feel like that anyway. So my point is, I don't think you should feel that bad about the way the space was, because we should try generally, I think, as artists to keep changing the way gallery spaces work, or try and think outside of, limiting ourselves to the gallery space or the ideal gallery space, which feels like, a luxury to have, but at the same time, why do you need it? Like, why does the work need it? Does it really need it? I think often some works are so strong that even if they were sitting in the corner of a room with other works on top of them, you'd still notice them and think about them. So I don't know, that's just a thought.
Yeah, that's really interesting things to think about. But I'm aware of the time. We are like almost 1 hour like running over. So we can probably like end our session. And Mushtaba and Jinshu already left. And I think I think Mushtaba kind of shared his experience through his presentation. Like he wasn't there through most of his show because he wanted to like play that character like of someone who was missing. And Junshu had some issues with his face, but I'm not really like, I don't really want to speak on behalf of anyone. Maybe I can ask them to like type a small, like couple of sentences, and I can post that in the website maybe, or share it with everyone. All right, so thank you so much to all of you for staying and sticking this long till the end, and thank you for like sharing your work and asking questions, engaging in critical discourse. We have like, so the plan is to do this monthly, with different practitioners and around like different topics. So this is choreographic practices. The next one is in August. I think maybe towards the end of maybe the one of the last weeks of August. It will always be on a Sunday. And the next theme is politics and poetics of care. I'm really excited about that because I think that, I personally am excited about that. And if any of you guys are like interested to be a panelist for any of the sessions, please feel free to to express share your interest. And what else? Yeah, and the month after that, we have haptic imaginations, looking at ways in which we can create knowledge with haptics, with touch-based understanding. All right, I don't want to take too much time. All right, thank you so much for being here, taking the time today on a Sunday.
Thank you, everyone.
And thanks for setting this up, Tony.
Yes, thank you for coming. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a great week.
Thank you.